For the first time ever, the United Nations is celebrating the International Day of Multilateralism and Diplomacy for Peace. Member states and observers gathered in the General Assembly to commemorate the day, which was initiated by Venezuela through the non-aligned movement. The date aims to reaffirm the UN's principles of resolving disputes through peaceful means and diplomacy.
Warm greetings from the Secretary General.
The Venezuelan Foreign Minister also took part in the day's activities. During his speech, Jorge Arreaza said that unilateral threats, the use of force and coercion for political goals should not be tolerated by any nation.
The NAM has taken advantage of this opportunity to reiterate its profound concern and opposition to the growing trend and use of unilateralism, to arbitrary actions and to measures imposed unilaterally which undermine the UN Charter and international law. This includes the use and threat to use force and unilateral coercive measures used as a mechanism to achieve national political goals. In light of that, we renew our determination to continue to work to build a multipolar world by strengthening multilateralism and multilateral diplomacy through the United Nations and the multilateral process. We believe that these are the appropriate fora for preserving the interests of our countries and for resolving through dialogue and cooperation the problems afflicting mankind. These are the pillars: international law, diplomacy, and multilateralism.
Our correspondent in New York, Karina Cartagena, gives us the details.
El canciller Jorge Arreaza también tomó la palabra en
The Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza participated in the meeting of the General Assembly to commemorate the International Day of Multilateralism and Diplomacy for Peace. Arreaza spoke on behalf of the non-aligned movement. He stressed the importance of respecting international law and the UN Charter. Arreaza also said that unilateralism is currently threatening the security and peace of many countries, so it is important to promote multilateralism to defend and respect the fundamental pillars of the UN, such as peace, international law, human rights, and sustainable development. Jorge Arreaza also spoke on behalf of his country, saying that Venezuela believes in a world where all powers are equal and that the UN should not become a best friends club, but a peace where all member states can be represented. He also pointed to a lack of respect for multilateralism, stressing statements made by the US in the UN General Assembly in September 2018, when President Donald Trump called on member nations to impose sanctions against Venezuela. Arreaza also said that U.S. State Secretary Mike Pompeo called other countries so they would not recognize the Venezuelan government in the Security Council. Arreaza said that the U.S. cannot continue imposing its rule in the UN, and that is why this meeting is important, so that the entire international community understands the relevance of respecting international law and multilateralism. Before the meeting, the Venezuelan Foreign Minister met with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres to talk about the political situation in Venezuela. The President of the Assembly, Maria Fernanda Espinosa, also called on countries to combat global challenges in a collective way. Other member states such as Russia, Cuba and Mexico are also participating in the meeting, which will end at 6 p.m. New York time.
We thank Karina Cartagena for that report. Caribbean countries are protesting the appointment of Gustavo as the new representative of Venezuela to the Organization of American States, nominated by Juan Guaido. Ambassadors from at least 4 Caribbean countries staged a walkout before Tarre spoke at the OAS permanent session on Tuesday. On Monday, 8 CARICOM member states, including St. Kitts, Trinidad, and Barbados, wrote to the OAS condemning Tarre's appointment. CARICOM has adopted a unified front on Venezuela, maintaining a policy of non-interference. A number of solidarity groups, now calling itself the Embassy Protection Collective, have mobilized to defend the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C. They say that Venezuelan opposition proxies will try to take over the office, adding that today and tomorrow are crucial. The collective says that it's prepared to remain there in order to protect the sovereignty of Venezuela.
Nor the invasion
We are now joined live by Dr. Margaret Flowers, the co-director of the organization Popular Resistance. Margaret is inside the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C. right now. Hi, Margaret. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Margaret, can you bring us up to date on what has been going on there at the embassy? I understand that a number of activities have been held this week.
That's right. We've been staying in the embassy 24 hours a day for a couple of weeks now and holding public events each night. We bring in speakers to talk about the situation in countries like Honduras, in Iran. We've had someone talk about Julian Assange. We've had cultural events. And tonight we're actually having a very special event with John Kiriakou, a CIA whistleblower who's going to talk about CIA-led coups, an insider's view.
Margaret, what kind of threat does the embassy face there? Has anything happened thus far in terms of attempts to take over the offices?
Not yet, although this morning the Secret Service were outside of the building, walking around it, taking photos, and so we think that they are probably preparing for coming to try to remove us from the embassy. We expect that may happen as early as tomorrow. And so today's been very busy. Many people are arriving here who are planning to stay here overnight, and will be, here in the morning if they come to say that no, this is not they should not be entering, that we're here with the permission of the Venezuelan government and they do not have permission to enter.
Yeah. What is your organization's stance on Venezuela and on U.S. policies towards the country in particular?
Well, we are anti-imperialist. We do not think that the United States has the right to tell other countries, who their leaders are, that we do not have the right to intervene in the affairs of other countries. We need to respect their sovereignty and their self-determination. And we see what's happening here as a very dangerous precedent because the coup against President Maduro failed, but the United States government is trying to act like it didn't fail and is going ahead anyway and giving assets to this opposition leader. We think that sets a bad precedent for Venezuela and for other countries, because who would be next if they succeed?
Yeah. Margaret, lastly, what is the message you and other activists there want to send to the U.S. government? And do you have any major actions coming up?
Well, we have told members of Congress and the State Department that we are on the side of the law. The Vienna Convention is very clear that the embassies are sovereign territory, that it is up to the government of Venezuela to decide who is here, that they will be trespassing if they enter, and that the United Nations is recognizing, the Maduro government. Over 100 countries are recognizing the Maduro government, and so the Venezuelan government is working on developing a protectorate status for the embassy. So this is they shouldn't be taking any action right now at all. There's a lot that's still being worked out and being resolved. And so as far as action, we're just here. We're going to have a rally tomorrow morning, but many of us are staying in the embassy and we will not leave.
Margaret, we thank you so much for your time for Telesur English.
Thanks.
We were just talking to Margaret Flowers. She's the co-director of the organization Popular Resistance. More news now. Mexican President Manuel Lopez Obrador says his country will not be provoked by the U.S. president's accusation that Mexican soldiers confronted U.S. Border Patrol agents last week. Trump tweeted that Mexican soldiers pulled guns on the U.S. soldiers, calling it a possible diversionary tactic for drug smugglers on the border. Trump also called on Mexico to do more to stop another northbound migrant caravan. Lopez Obrador was shown the tweet during a news conference mere minutes after it was posted. He has vowed to look into the alleged border incident.
We won't fall in any provocation. I'm telling this to President Donald Trump, that we want to maintain a respectful and friendly relationship with his government. We will analyze this incident. We will take into consideration what he is saying, and we will act according to the law, respecting our sovereignty. The most important thing is to tell him we won't get into a fight with the U.S. government.
More Central American migrant caravans have been arriving in Mexico, according to official figures. In the border state of Chiapas, there are thousands of people waiting to regularize their immigration status before heading north towards the U.S.
At just 17, Jorge decided to leave his home country of Honduras in January. He was fleeing the poverty and violence of Central America. With few belongings, like most others in his situation, he joined one of the many caravans being organized to cross Mexico.
There were many people, and so it was not easy. We could have been robbed or kidnapped. It was not going to be easy, but I felt more secure in the caravan.
This unusual flow of migrants increased sharply in the last quarter of 2018. The number of women, adolescents, and children increased the most. A third of those on the caravans are minors. Officials of the National Institute of Migration carry out checks. On Monday, on the road from Mapastepec to Pijijiapan, some of them were attacked by a group of migrants who, according to the official version, refused to go to a registration post. The ministers of the Interior and Foreign Relations explained the situation in the southern state of Chiapas, where more than 5,800 people are waiting for a permit that allows them to cross Mexican territory and reach the border with the United States.
As we have said before, the migratory policy of the government of Mexico has three fundamental axes: the protection of human rights, the economic and social development of the countries of the Central American region, and the orderly registration of migrants who enter our territory.
However, the arrival of so many foreigners has overwhelmed many of the Mexican institutions and is stretching the resources of the towns and communities along the route of the caravans.
We must support not only migrants in Tapachula, but also the population there, so they can be hospitable with migrants.
During the month of April, nearly 12,000 people have been sent back to their countries of origin. There's also been an unusual number of citizens from different countries of Africa and Asia. In Tapachula, there are at least 1,300 people waiting for their migratory situation to be resolved.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. Indigenous communities are protesting in the Brazilian capital against the president's policies. Indigenous people set up camp in the area where the main ministries are located. They're demanding respect for their rights and for their territories. The government orders security forces to reinforce security in the area, despite the fact communities are demonstrating peacefully.
We are not going to accept this because the government is practically injuring the Brazilian Constitution, which gives guarantees to indigenous people and for the demarcation of indigenous lands.
We are here for our rights, to defend, to speak, to complain. So that's the problems with us, with the indigenous population. Don't go on.
Our correspondent in Brazil, Danay Galetti, brings us more.
Sí, gracias. Un placer saludarte a ti y a quienes reciben la señal de Telesur.
We're here at the headquarters of Brazil's government, where indigenous people have set up camp. More than 5,000 indigenous leaders are expected to join the protest in representation of over 800,000 indigenous people. Last week, Minister of Justice Sérgio Moro authorized security forces to act where indigenous people have already planned to demonstrate from the 24th to the 26th of April. Indigenous communities say that their demonstration is peaceful and that they set up the camp to defend the rights of their communities, especially to defend their rights, which are in danger since Jair Bolsonaro took office and began to attack the rights of the indigenous people. Rights that are protected by the Constitution, including the right to own lands.
We thank Danay for that report. After outrage in Colombia over the assassination of a former FARC member in northern Santander, the Colombian military has confirmed it killed the Mar Torres. The military claimed that Torres had tried to take a gun from a soldier, but the local community said that the military had tried to bury his body to get rid of the evidence and lied to them about his whereabouts. Torres was part of the reincorporation program for former combatants, which is part of the peace agreement in the country. A group of Colombian NGOs has released a new report saying the situation of human rights defenders in the country remains critical. They say at least 8 social leaders are attacked every 3 days.
The situation of human rights defenders in Colombia remains critical. There was a big increase in murders and assault in general between 2017 and 2018.
Over 100 friends and family members have gathered to hold a mass funeral for victims of a landslide in Colombia. 24 victims of the landslide in the town of Rosas were buried. Following days of heavy rains, the landslide swept away 8 houses and killed at least 33 people last Sunday. Authorities continue to search through rubble. The parents of the Swedish computer programmer detained in Ecuador, Olavini, are concerned about their son's health in jail. Our correspondent in Quito, Denise Herrera, has the story.
The detention of the cybersecurity expert Olavini has many people worried, not least his parents who had come from Sweden to visit him.
We visited Ola, and he does not feel as good as the first time we saw him. He and the other prisoners are not given time in the leisure area. They cannot receive visits every day, and they do not have good food. We are worried about our son.
The Swedish consul in Ecuador accompanied the visit. He confirmed that Ecuador's ambassador in Stockholm has been summoned by the Swedish government to explain Benin's situation.
The Swedish authorities are in contact with the ambassador of Ecuador in Stockholm, who will not interfere with the Ecuadorian legal system.
The Ecuadorian authorities insist they have evidence that links Olavini to WikiLeaks and his attempts to destabilize the Ecuadorian government.
In this or any case, we are expecting that the prosecutor follows due process. The prosecutor has the case in hand. An investigation is underway into attacks on computer systems, and we will wait for the justice system to deliver the results.
However, social movements and political figures both in Ecuador and internationally have expressed their support for the computer programmer.
We are supporting Ola not only as a person, we also want to explain what free software is and why it is important to protect our private data on the internet.
Olavini's lawyers revealed that their appeal against his preventive detention will be heard on May 2nd. They argue that he was wrongfully arrested and that there is no evidence against him. Denise Herrera, Telesur Quito, Ecuador.
Vulnerable residents in the southeastern African island of Mayotte have fled to shelters following the arrival of Cyclone Kenneth. The tropical storm is soon expected to make a landfall in Mozambique, where more than 600,000 are at risk. This comes just a month after the devastating Cyclone Idai struck Mozambique, killing hundreds of people and displacing thousands. Within only 2 weeks before South Africans head to the polls, economic freedom fighters leader Julius Malema is confident that his party will win the elections. Malema, who is currently on a countrywide campaign tour, said millions of South Africans are going to vote for his party because it is their only hope for economic freedom. He also accused the ruling African National Congress of abandoning the people who put them in power in 1994.
We are hoping for 50% plus. You can't go into a boxing ring to lose. We are going into it to win. We want to win the elections, and all the research shows that this party is going to shock a lot of people.
Meanwhile, young South Africans are hoping that whichever party wins, they find a solution to the country's high unemployment numbers. The fall of apartheid 25 years ago opened the doors of universities for many young black South Africans. However, the economy has failed to create jobs for the thousands of youths who graduate every year. Statistics show that more than 50% of young South Africans are unemployed.
So it's like you go to school, you go to school, you go to school, and then once you are qualified, you sit with a whole stack of certificates that you can't actually use. But then you can see within the public sector that, yeah, I can make a contribution. Yeah, I can make a contribution. But it's like they are just not hiring the correct candidates. If you look at the
About 220 victims of human trafficking have been rescued by police in Benin and Nigeria. 157 children were among those rescued. The victims were from Benin, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and Togo. They were moved across the border between Nigeria and Benin as merchandise, according to the Interpol. 100 officers carried out raids, arresting 47 people. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. The situation in Venezuela has been featured prominently at an international security conference taking place in Moscow. The Russian defense minister told delegates that the United States is reapplying the Manuel doctrine in its campaign of aggression against the Venezuelan government. He warned that Washington could even use force against Latin American countries that do not bow to its interests. Our correspondent Hansel Oro has more from the security conference in Moscow.
The International Security Conference here in Moscow has more than 1,000 delegates from 110 countries taking part. The main aim is to discuss the military threats that exist in different parts of the world, as well as international arms controls. This is an important issue for Russia, following the United States' decision to pull out of the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty signed with the Soviet Union in 1987. There's also been strong condemnation from Russian delegates of the U.S. threats in Latin America, particularly towards Venezuela. The Russian National Security Advisor Nikolai Patrushev talked about the various aspects of the hybrid warfare waged against the Bolivarian Republic, which includes the orchestration of mass protests and the development of a media campaign to present a distorted picture of what is going on in Venezuela, as well as the constant threat of direct military intervention. The conference has also talked about the situation in the Middle East, including Syria, Yemen and Libya, and the question of the Golan Heights, which Russia continues to recognize as Syrian territory after the United States decided to call it part of Israel. Among the participants in this conference are the heads of various chiefs of staff, defense ministers and military experts, and they've also addressed questions of cybersecurity and security in the Arctic region.
We thank Hansel Oro for that report. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has arrived in the Russian city of Vladivostok ahead of a summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The meeting will be the first between the two leaders and will focus on nuclear issues on the Korean peninsula. Russia has been playing a role in encouraging North Korea to give up its nuclear program for years. Bilateral relations and regional cooperation are also set to be discussed. On Tuesday, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia held a mass execution of Saudi citizens accused of terror-related crimes. 37 citizens were beheaded, with at least one of the bodies being pinned to a pole as a warning to others. Reportedly, most of the victims were minority Shiite Muslims, and at least 3 of them were minors. A number of them had allegedly participated in anti-government protests back in 2014. The Kingdom's Interior Ministry defended the executions and said they were carried out in accordance with the law. Iran has scoffed at U.S. oil sanctions, warning that the hostility will not go unanswered. The leader of the Islamic Revolution emphasized that the nation was not going to sit idly by in the face of its enemies. Speaking to Iranian workers on Wednesday, the leader played down Washington's recent decision to end exemptions from sanctions for countries buying oil from Tehran. He says the country will export as much crude as it needs in defiance of U.S. sanctions.
We will export our oil as much as we need and we intend. The US wishfully think they have blocked Iranian oil sales. They should know that their hostile measure won't be left without a response. This nation does not sit idly by in the face of animosities.
The Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has called for another referendum on independence for Scotland. Sturgeon told the Scottish Parliament that the people of Scotland must not be sidelined by the chaos over Brexit in London. She said her Scottish National Party would draw up legislation this year and that the referendum should be held by May 2021. In the United Kingdom's Brexit vote in 2016, Scotland voted by a large majority to remain in the European Union. And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.